In tonight's Government Insider, gutting the IRS union. Some Senate Republicans want to prohibit unions at the agency and in the process deal a major blow to the National Treasury Employees Union. So what are these GOP lawmakers trying to accomplish? For some insight, we turn now to our guest. On Capitol Insider, Joe Davidson is a Federal Diary columnist with the Washington Post, and he's standing by for us in the Post newsroom. Joe, thanks. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you.
The latest proposal by some members of the Senate Finance Committee would eliminate unions at the IRS. What's going on? Why are lawmakers floating this idea in the first place?
Well, the Republicans in particular have kind of targeted the IRS for some time now over allegations that it played favorites in the way it deals with nonprofit political groups. That was this whole issue behind Lois Lerner, a former IRS official who was brought to testify, and it became a very big controversy with the Republicans really pushing the narrative that the IRS is essentially playing political favorites. Well, they feel that the IRS should not play any political favorites, and of course it should not. And so some members of Congress, basically led by Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, are arguing that the employees at the IRS should not be unionized because the union there, which is the National Treasury Employees Union, tends to support Democrats, as most unions do.
It's one thing to give the appearance. Is there any evidence that this is going on, or are we just talking about maybe some scapegoating here?
Well, there is no evidence that the political beliefs of the rank-and-file members of the IRS or that the union itself have any level of undue influence at all. And in fact, Lois Lerner, whom I just mentioned, who was kind of at the center of this storm, was not even in the union. She was a manager, and as a union, and as a manager, she was not qualified or to be in a union. I mean, she was not allowed to be in a union. And so this is seen by the union folks as really just an excuse to try to get rid of the union at the IRS, and as part of a larger Republican agenda to kind of go after labor organizations in one way or another.
You anticipated my next question here. If they're successful at the IRS, might they try the same thing at other agencies? And I think the answer is pretty obvious, isn't it?
Well, it seems like there would be no reason not to. I mean, the argument that federal employees should not be influenced by politics, of course, that applies to all federal employees,
sure.
Particularly those in the executive branch and the judicial branch. Congressional employees who work for a member of Congress clearly are going to be identified with one political party or another. But no matter what department you work for in the executive branch or in the judicial branch, you are not expected to let politics influence your decisions when you're working to serve the American people. So it seemed to me that the logic behind saying that there should be no unions at the IRS could clearly apply across the government. But of course, that's why there is a civil service. There's a nonpartisan civil service in this country, which is there so that basically political hacks won't populate the civil service positions.
Let's talk a little bit about the union itself, the NTEU. Sensitive time for them. They're in the process of electing a new president. How is the union responding to these attacks?
Well, these attacks, these comments from the Republicans came out just before their re-election, and they did, of course, they naturally went on with the election, and he elected Tony Reardon, who had been a national executive vice president. Now he moves up to the top slot, taking the place of Colleen Kelly, who had been in that position for 16 years. And of course, they responded with anger, you might say, saying they're not going to stand for any attempt to have them decertified, because about half of their members are at the IRS. And also the American Federation of Government Employees just re-elected J. David Cox as its president, and he told me that they also would stand side by side with the NTEU in order to fight off any attempt to have a union decertified at any federal agency.
Very interesting stuff. If we can, let's move on now, if we can, to the OPM data breach, the hack attack that affected more than 20 million federal workers, still causing agency headaches. And now cyber experts are warning what the thieves will do with all of that information. Joe, what's your view?
Well, the situation is that it might not be just a theft. And of course, a theft of personal information belonging to more than 20 million people is bad enough. Perhaps even worse than the theft of the data is the potential for the thieves to manipulate the data. And if you manipulate that data, you can do all sorts of really strange things. I mean, you can essentially make someone appear to be less trustworthy than they really are. And then would the United States government have some doubt about sending that person into a particularly sensitive assignment? And if the information of just one particular individual is corrupted, then how do you trust the whole database? And so there are folks in the government and outside of the government who are warning that this could be a real potential danger for the theft of that information.
Let's talk quickly, if we can, about what's been done to try and remediate all this. Lots has been promised. Anything delivered?
Well, so far, federal employees, the vast majority of them are still waiting. Now, this week, OPM expects to have some information out that essentially is designed to help federal employees cope with the loss of their personal information. They're going to hire an outside contractor, that's the announcement we're supposed to get this week, who will help federal employees, not only employees, but contractors, job applicants, and even family members, with such things as credit monitoring, identity theft protection, that sort of thing. But with a group of people that large, 20 million plus people, that's going to be a big job. And so I think that's one reason they haven't announced the contractor who will do that work until now.
Joe Davidson is the Federal Diary columnist with the Washington Post, and he's been our guest. Joe, many thanks.
Thank you.